Joe Biden finally responded to the horrific, the tragic, the deadly wildfires that are happening in Hawaii, on Maui right now. And he just left the beach in Delaware. He was vacationing there. And this is what he said in response to a question from a reporter about the rising death toll on Maui. Take a listen.
Will you come talk about the Hawaii response, Mr. President?
No comment, says the President of the United States. No comment. There are a lot of people who are saying that the moment that this is Biden's Bush and Katrina moment, you know, the moment where Bush was in the airplane looking out the window, they released this photograph of him looking down on the wreckage from Katrina. And the image did not portray what the Bush administration ostensibly wanted it to portray. It made Bush look like an elitist. It made him look very far removed from the problem. And it arguably, you can make different arguments here, but arguably this was the beginning of the end of the success of the Bush presidency. There are some who are saying that Joe Biden's response to the Maui wildfires, his no comment, could be the same moment. I don't think it's going to be the same moment because the media is protecting him. It was the media who made the Bush-Katrina moment a thing. The media are going to do the opposite with Joe Biden. They are going to protect him. So I don't think it's going to be the same moment. However, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but more information has come to light. We still don't know all the details about what happened with these Maui wildfires, but we are learning more each day. And what we're learning is that the Democrats are liars. We're learning that the mainstream media has no interest in the truth, and that Democrats, it's just the most despicable political tactic to use a tragedy, especially a tragedy where a large number of people are dying, including a large number of children are dying, to try to push a pre-existing political narrative. We see this sometimes when there's a mass shooting or some kind of gun violence, and the left immediately steps in and tries to push their anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment agenda. Like, people just died. Stop trying to push your tyrannical agenda on us. We saw this during COVID, where people were so fearful, and the Democrats used this fear of COVID to push their pre-existing political agenda towards authoritarianism. This is exactly what's happening now. Whenever you hear a Democrat say, oh, this is about climate change, they're using climate change as a vehicle to exert authoritarian control over us, and they're trying to exploit a tragedy in order to accelerate that agenda. But the facts of the matter show that, A, the government in Hawaii was delinquent in warning people and preparing for wildfires, even though they had a ton of advance notice, not just of this wildfire in particular, but a ton of advance warning years ahead of time that this situation could occur because of circumstances on the island, and they did nothing to prepare for it in order to mitigate it. It's really, really a significant point to make that the government has a role in protecting citizens. There is a contract between a government and a citizen where the citizen relies to a certain extent on the government for safety. I mean, not safety in the sense that you can rely on a police officer always to be your personal security guard, but for a society, especially a community, we do rely on the government to act with due diligence, or otherwise they should relinquish their rights over certain properties. And what I mean by that is, if we can bring this up on the screen, this is element number 3. Steve Malloy, who I mentioned before, is doing an excellent job documenting all of the failures of the government in Hawaii. There was no water in the fire hydrants. This is according to a firefighter who was on duty. No water in the fire hydrants, even though they had warning of the risk of wildfires in Hawaii. And we talked yesterday about how they didn't send out a warning. They didn't send out, the sirens didn't blare. People had no idea that this was happening. Some people until their houses were already on fire. So the emergency warning system failed, even though it had gone off twice wrongly in the 2 years prior to that. There was no water in the fire hydrants, according to firefighters on duty. And then we have this situation. This is very similar to what happened in California, where there's no brush control. And so dead trees and branches and pine needles and all of this stuff becomes just like ripe for combustion. When the sugar plantations left Hawaii, what happened to the sugar plantations? Well, non-native, fire-prone wild grasses took over that were extremely combustible. They were ripe for wildfires. This is element number 4. Again, all credit here to Steve Malloy, who's tracking all this stuff. It's incredible the circumstances that could have been avoided. So I'm going to read you what he posted on X here. He said, 2020 hazard mitigation plan for Maui estimated a 90% chance of wildfires every year. 90%. Like, comprehend that. When the land management, the sugar plantations left, fire-prone non-native grasses took over. Everyone in the government and green groups knew this, but no one did anything. Now they're trying to blame climate for their reckless disregard of reality. So they knew that this was basically a tinderbox. They could have done anything. I mean, you could have sheep graze on that grass and it would mitigate the risk. And I say sheep because this is exactly what happened in California. There used to be sheep ranches in California. And sheep, anybody who has owned a sheep knows that sheep eat everything down to a nub. So plants, grass, shrubs, just eat it down to a nub, mitigate the fire risk. But when the sheep ranches were bought by the government in California and these areas of land became national parks, the sheep were no longer on this land, and all of this shrubbery and this brush and this grass grew and wasn't tended at all, and therefore became dangerous for when a fire was started. The same thing happened in Hawaii, and yet the government knew it, the green groups knew it, and no one did anything about it, and now they're pointing the finger at climate change, which is their pre-existing political agenda to exert authoritarianism over us. And by the way, even scientists who believe in the premise of climate change were issuing these warnings. And I'm going to read you this letter from a scientist back in 2019 about the possibility of deadly wildfires on Maui. So back in 2019, a scientist who believes in the premise of climate change, which I do not typically believe in the premise of climate change, issued this letter. I want to bring this up on the screen. This is from Clay Trauernicht, who writes, I appreciate your newspaper's coverage of the West Maui wildfires, especially with respect to their impact on the local community. I agree these fires raise many serious questions. However, I'd also offer that many people are working on the very answers to those questions across the state. It's not rocket science. There are just 3 ingredients to every wildfire: an ignition source, fuels to burn, and the right climate. Local knowledge and local action can help with 2 of these. For fuels, Representative McKelvey hit it on the head in the article. Rains come, the grasses grow. Rains stop, the grasses burn, aka the grass fire cycle. Maui is now firmly in the post-plantation era, and the West Maui fires are only the most recent example of what eventually happens when large tropical grasslands go untended. But the fuels, all that grass, is the one thing that we can directly change to reduce fire risk. Fuel breaks can be expanded to slow fires and provide access for firefighters. Livestock are incredible tools to keep fire risks down. We can plant other things. Active agricultural lands, for example, don't burn, or they burn when we want them to. And restoring forest cover and riparian vegetation can limit the potential for fires to spread. Ignitions are trickier. Electricity infrastructure is clearly an important area to explore. But far more important than these ideas are the people who are turning them to action. He talks a little bit about the government infrastructure here, but then he goes, we cannot diminish the scope of this challenge. This submission offers little to alleviate the trauma felt by the families who experienced and suffered losses in those fires, yet there's no better reason to take this issue head on, and no reason Hawaii cannot take matters into its own hands. While we continue to compete with other states for federal fire mitigation funding, California decided last year to allocate $195 million for a fire forest health fund. The West Maui fires are, again, just the latest example of the cost wildfires continue to exert in terms of life, property, and our irreparable and irreplaceable cultural and natural resources. Just like with climate change, we know what steps will reduce the risk of wildfire, but actually taking these steps will require reinvesting in and frankly reimagining our individual and collective responsibility for the larger landscape. Hi guys, it's Liz Wheeler. Don't forget to watch my show, The Liz Wheeler Show, every night at 7 p.m. on the First TV. You can download the free First TV app, or you can visit thefirsttv.com/Liz and start watching today.